I know that a lot of people have signed up for the Here's How.ie podcast at various times over the past years. And I know that some people go back and listen to the whole back catalogue. Some people just start listening from wherever they pick up and into the future. That's all fine. And also I know that some podcasts, historically, do better than others, and some are really evergreen. People keep on listening to them years later. Easily the most evergreen podcast is the one that I'm going to repeat now. It's about RTE's relationship and their questionable sponsorship relationship with the AA. Obviously, now that has become much more relevant than it was 4 or 5 years ago when this podcast was made first. I'm not going to charge on Patreon for this, but I think for anyone who hasn't heard it already, this podcast is well worth a listen or even a re-listen if you have heard it already.
This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 82 of Here's How for the 6th of February 2019. This podcast is a bit different to most of the ones before. It's more of a documentary into a topic that I've been chasing for a while. How rigorous in its independence is our national broadcaster?
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast.
Coming up on today's podcast.
Well, I think it's controversial because I don't think any news organisation should take anything for free.
Why? Get me the reason why that's the case.
Because it undermines your independence.
That's coming up shortly, but first, this podcast takes a lot of research. That's a pretty big time commitment in itself, but some topics I want to cover take much more time than others. Sometimes months. In the case of this one, years. It's the sort of thing that I'll do more of if people would like to sponsor it on Patreon. So if you find this interesting or valuable, I'll tell you how to make it happen more often at the end of the podcast. Our national broadcaster, RTE, has pretty strict rules on balance and fairness in what they broadcast. Obviously, RTE can't tell lies about people, but the rules go much further because you can be very biased without ever telling any actual lies. For one, to be biased, you could just ignore some stories. Another form of bias is to always cover only one aspect of a story and to ignore another aspect. For example, take two American websites, the far-right Breitbart and the left-wing Huffington Post. They cover immigration in radically different ways. On Breitbart, any negative story about an immigrant will be splashed all over their website. Any immigrant committing a crime, even getting a parking ticket, gets huge coverage. By contrast, on Huffington Post, any immigrant kid getting so much as a gold star for their homework is a heartwarming tale of triumph over adversity. Without ever telling an actual lie, those sites, banging out either negative or positive stories day after day, month after month, they affect the perception of their readers. If every time a topic is mentioned, it's always in a negative or always in a positive way, that has an impact. So, to be balanced, Section 2.3 of RTE's guidelines say that they maintain a balance of opinion that reflects the weight of evidence, ensures fair treatment, is open-minded, and provides opportunities over time so that no significant strand of thought is ignored or underrepresented. Keep that in mind. No significant strand of thought is ignored or underrepresented. Those are the rules. RTE copies the BBC in much of these rules, but RTE relies on commercial funding for more than half its income, so there is the added danger for RTE that commercial interests will influence its content. And it has rules to deal with this as well. RTE has two revenue streams here. First, there's advertising, 30-second slots to say buy this soap powder or those baked beans or whatever, and sponsorship of programs, so a company's image is enhanced by association. This program is brought to you by the nice people at Acme Corporation or whatever. Here, the weather is sponsored by ESB Networks.
RTE Radio 1 Weather with ESB Networks. Download the...
Everyone knows what an ad is, but sponsorship is specifically defined in RTE's rules. There are 2 tests. First, the sponsor makes a contribution in cash or kind. And secondly, the sponsor gets a mention on air. The ESB pay RTE money, and RTE puts in a plug for the ESB, so to speak. Now, for sponsored programs, there are particular rules. These are designed to prevent RTE from being unduly influenced by their sponsors. In particular, the sponsor of a program is not allowed to have any input at all into the editorial content of the program that they're sponsoring. Also, sponsors are not allowed to sponsor a program that could touch on their interests. For example, RTE coverage of the ploughing championships was sponsored by Aldi. But Aldi would not be allowed to sponsor, say, a consumer program that commented on supermarkets. And Aldi is allowed to sponsor the ploughing championships, but a farm equipment manufacturer would not be. The reason for this is twofold. Firstly, even if they don't have any editorial input, it might create the perception that they do, and that would bring RTE into disrepute. But more importantly, if someone working for the sponsored show, a producer or a presenter, if they knew that ultimately their paycheck is being paid by a particular company, that's likely to sit in the back of their mind and subtly influence their decisions. That's why no company can sponsor a program that could touch on their own area of concern, and there's no sponsorship of news and current affairs programs at all, because almost anyone could end up being the subject of news coverage. The issue that I pursued with RTE was AA Roadwatch. The AA is a strange organisation. It was founded in the UK more than 100 years ago, specifically to campaign against speed limits. It was owned by its members until 1999 when it became a public company, and it now has an annual revenue of well over €1 billion. Through the years, as well as campaigning against speed limits, they have campaigned extensively against seatbelts, against unleaded petrol, against public transport projects, and against taxation of the motor industry, which they regard as unfair. In the 1990s, the AA in Ireland began to provide traffic news inserts to RTE Radio, and this has grown so that they now provide more than 150 broadcasts a week on RTE, plus about 50 more on Today FM. They have a series of little one-person studios at 21 South William Street in the centre of Dublin, and the people who read and write the broadcasts are AA staff members. They're employed by the AA, not by RTE. Those AA staff members typically rattle off a few street names, followed by an adjective like chock-a-block, bumper to bumper, or, my favourite, jammers. Like any news, it gives information after the fact, and it's difficult to see how any driver could use information like an earlier crash has been cleared, even if they were driving on one of the half-dozen routes that's included in a bulletin.
Still heavy on the M1 southbound from before Junction 7 Julianstown through to Junction 5 Balbriggan South following that earlier crash. It's slow now from Junction 7 Kill through to Newlands Cross flyover, where an earlier crash has been cleared. Earlier works have finished up on Merrion Row outbound just after the Kildare Street junction, but traffic is still heavy from Cork Street.
Google Maps gives live traffic speeds for every road in the country, and the overwhelming majority of Irish drivers have a smartphone, so it's not clear what useful service AA Roadwatch is providing to anyone. It's also noticeable that the locations featured are overwhelmingly middle class. Junctions serving posh areas of South Dublin have become famous, such as Knockline or Carrick Mines. It seems that working class areas don't have any transport problems at all. And one of the first AA Roadwatch presenters, Conor Faulkner, has become a household name as probably the best-known industry lobbyist in the country. In this role, Faulkner has appeared hundreds and hundreds of times on RTE.
Before I bring in Conor Faulkner on this, just one other question. Why don't these...
Let's stay with that story, and Conor Faulkner of AA Ireland is with me in studio. Conor, thanks for coming in.
Busy at the moment, as Conor Faulkner from AA will tell us.
Here in studio by the Director of Consumer Affairs for the AA, Conor Faulkner. Conor Faulkner, thanks indeed for talking. And by Conor Faulkner, Director of Consumer Affairs at the AAA. Conor, you might explain.
I think we have to face facts and accept that the buses are going to have to be taken out of there. I mean, ultimately...
As well as lobbying, the AA is also a major player in the insurance business. Remember, RTE's own guidelines define a sponsored programme as a programme where any type of contribution is made in return for promoting the contributor's name. I would have thought that an idiot in a hurry could see that this means that AA Roadwatch is a sponsored programme. The AA pay the salaries of the presenters and they pay the rent on the studios. And in return they get a name check on air hundreds of times a week. In fact, the AA often also promote their own web address for the website that they use for their political campaigns and to sell their insurance, but that's not necessary to establish that it's a sponsored programme, just that they meet some of the costs of the broadcast and they get a name check. That puts it within the definition. I think that that's breaking RTE's rules. First off, remember that a sponsor is not allowed to have any input whatsoever into the content of the programme that they sponsor. In this case, they have total editorial control. AA employees write the script and then read it on air themselves live. Secondly, you can't sponsor a programme where you have an interest in the content, like Aldi can't sponsor a programme about supermarkets. The AA are by far the biggest motor industry lobbying organisation in the country. The content of AA Roadwatch is clearly something that matters to them. I'll come back to that in a bit. But there's a third rule that RTE are breaking. No sponsorship at all is allowed from any political or campaign group. It doesn't matter if you're Save the Eighth, Fianna Fáil, Right to Water, the Workers' Party or the Roscommon Hospital campaign. On RTE, you're not allowed to advertise and you're not allowed to sponsor. Full stop. Now, I mentioned these issues to some RTE staff. Many of them just shrugged their shoulders and they said, but it's just traffic news. Several of them compared it to Met Éireann supplying the weather, and I don't accept that for a couple of reasons. Firstly, Met Éireann staff are civil servants who are not allowed to promote political causes. By contrast, the AA explicitly say on their website that they run political campaigns. As well as media pressure, the AA also do vigorous behind-the-scenes lobbying of government officials and ministers to try to change transport policy. And the content of AA Roadwatch has a specific relevance to that. For example, the AA campaigned hard, with some success, against the construction of Lewis. The project was delayed for years, reduced in scale, and the 2 lines that were built were shortened so that initially they didn't even meet. In AA Roadwatch broadcasts, the AA doesn't normally dish out blame for the traffic problems they report on. They might talk about an accident causing congestion, but they don't say whose fault it was. But during the construction phases of the Lewis, one of the most common items carried on AA Roadwatch was delays due to Lewis works. On almost every slot, they had some mention of Lewis works causing congestion, Lewis works slowing traffic, traffic diverted to move services for Lewis, road closed for Lewis works, stop and go system for Lewis works, Lewis delay, Lewis problem, Lewis congestion, Lewis traffic jam, over and over. I'm not suggesting they said anything untrue, but like the left and right-wing American news sites choosing to highlight either every good or every bad story about immigration, you don't have to lie to promote your opinion. If you have a big enough platform, you can just repeat over and over the topic that suits you and ignore the one that doesn't. You can be certain that AA Roadwatch never reports on congestion caused by Ireland's excessive car dependence. You never hear about delays caused by lack of investment in public transport. They never mention traffic jams caused by poorly planned developments miles from any amenities. Now, whether you agree or disagree with the AA's campaigns, you can't argue the fact that the AA are making editorial decisions that impact directly on the areas of public policy that they campaign on. And there's another problem. Even if the reporting is balanced, The very fact that something is reported 150 times a week on our national broadcaster is a signal that it is a national priority. If we cut from the Dáil or from the White House to hear that traffic is slow but moving on the Lower Glanmire Road, it sends a message that that issue is more important than someone waiting in the rain in a working class area for a bus that never shows up, or living in a town in Ireland where there's no public transport at all. And for the AA, this strategy works. I can prove it. Regardless of the effect on public opinion, just the effect of politicians personally listening to AA Roadwatch makes politicians more amenable to the AA's lobbying. How do I know? Because they say so. It's on the Dáil record.
You only have to listen to AA Roadwatch in the morning. The N4 and the N7 feature absolutely on every single...
I appreciate that, but I would put it to you, Minister, that the N11 is an extreme case. Anecdotally, turn on AA Roadwatch in the morning, driving in, and on many mornings, given every road...
In my area, Dunkettle interchange, and OPW need to be more forthcoming with their money.
We hear about the Dunkettle roundabout every morning on AA Roadwatch. Now we move.
The road into Adair has been named by AA Roadwatch as one of the country's worst in terms of traffic tailbacks.
It is such a major junction that it features regularly on the AA Roadwatch reports. Now, it's come to my attention...
That's TDs Catherine Murphy, Stephen Donnelly, Sean Fergal, Dan Neville and Derek Keating, all citing AA Roadwatch as empirical evidence which they say should guide transport spending. Many other TDs and senators have done the same. When I made a complaint on this basis to RTE, they had a clever response. They said that sponsorship rules don't apply to AA Roadwatch because it's not a sponsored programme. That doesn't really get them out of jail for free, because if you regard AA Roadwatch as a non-sponsored programme, there are a whole other set of rules that they're clearly breaking. RTE has a set of rules for advertisements, a set of rules for in-house productions, a set for external productions, and each set says that RTE can't hand over editorial control to partisan outside groups. But I got to hand it to them, that's a crafty way to get around the rules. If you want to make a complaint, you have to say what rule you're objecting under. But if they won't tell you what set of rules apply, you can't say for sure what rule they're breaking. In most cases, anyway. But there is one cardinal rule that RTE value highly: the independence of their news coverage. They really hate being accused of bias, and for that reason, the rules on news are much stricter. For example, there's no sponsorship at all allowed for news programmes. RTE has allowed the AA to run a coach and four through this rule. For years, guests being interviewed on Morning Ireland, on Drive Time and other programmes were often announced as talking from the AA Roadwatch studio. Oftentimes, the guest in question was Conor Faulkner himself, but dozens of other guests were directed to the AA building, greeted by AA staff, and seated in one of the little studios where they could put on headphones, hear the RTE presenter, and give their interview down the line. This was a nice little favour from the AA to RTE news programmes, convenient for guests who didn't have to schlep it out to Montrose, and saving RTE the expense of setting up a remote studio of their own. Convenient, helpful, free, and totally against the rules. It puts RTE editors and journalists in an invidious position where they have to choose between the obligation that the AA's generosity puts them under, or reporting objectively on the topics that the AA campaigns on. As I said, I've been pursuing this for a while, and I said to RTE that AA Roadwatch is clearly a sponsored programme. They said it's not. No explanation, just it's not. So I asked them, what is it? And they answered, it's not a sponsored programme. And I asked again, what is it? And they wouldn't give a straight answer. So 2.5 years ago, when I had the chance to interview Donal Byrne, a senior news editor at RTE who had worked on Morning Ireland for years, I included this as one of the questions I wanted to ask. Let me move on to one other thing then. What is AA Roadwatch?
What is AA Roadwatch? AA Roadwatch, my understanding is it's a service that provides traffic information on radio.
Sure, RTE obviously broadcasts programmes, be they in-house or commissioned from independent producers. You know, you can hear advertisements, you can hear sponsored programmes. Which one of those is AA Roadwatch?
My understanding is, and by the way, this is not any part of news and current affairs, that it's an arrangement between RTE and the AA, but I have no idea what the terms of that agreement are.
That does seem very clearly to meet the definition of sponsorship, doesn't it?
I think that's something you need to address with RTE corporately. It certainly doesn't apply in news and current affairs.
On first face, you would have to say that does appear to meet the criteria of being a sponsored programme.
I really have no idea what the terms of the agreement are with the AA, so I'm afraid I can't elaborate on that.
So, no joy there. Although later, Donald did say that he would find out who I could get an answer from in RTE Corporate. I emailed him several times after the podcast. Unfortunately, he never replied. So I went back to Karina Ryan. She was the RTE PR contact who had set up the interview with Donald in the first place, and I asked if she could help. I emailed her, I sent reminders, weeks passed, she never answered. I also got another PR contact in RTE, Laura Fitzgerald, and followed up queries with her. Again, no answer, and there it rested for a couple of years. Then in September last year, I got in contact with Neil O'Gorman, the corporate communications manager for RTE, because I wanted to do a wide-ranging interview with an RTE spokesperson, and he would be the person to arrange it, and I mentioned to him that I would like to include that question. He said that he'd get me an answer. 1 week later, I emailed him a reminder. No answer. And a month after that, I called him again to remind him of the question, and he said that he would get an answer within a day or two. Another week went by. I sent another reminder. He promised to get the answer. Another month later, I sent another reminder. We're up to the middle of November now, and he promised to get back to me. Another 2 weeks later, still no answer, and I was beginning to think that I just might be getting a runaround. So I called him again, and this time I hit record.
Speaking.
Is that Neil?
It is.
Neil, this is William Campbell from the Here's How.ie podcast.
William, how's it going?
Not so bad. Neil,
are you chasing me on AA Roadwatch?
I am, yes.
Yeah, do you know what? I every time I chase someone and no one comes back to me. So look, I'll try and commit to getting that back to you as soon as I can. Just between people being in and out, I haven't got a clear answer yet on where exactly it's at. But look, that might sound bizarre, but a number of people sort of are over it, are not over it, and in and out. So look, I'll try and nail it for you today. I'll just put a couple of calls through to people, but it's one of those I haven't been able to quite nail yet, and then it's gone off my list as other things crop up. So look,
I understand.
I know you're on it.
Listen, Neil, the thing about this is, obviously I've been chasing this with you for 2 months.
Yeah.
It's actually 2.5 years since RTE gave me a commitment that they'd answer that question. It does feel like this is being dodged and people are trying to run down the clock on it.
Not the case. A couple of people I've spoken to weren't entirely sure of the arrangement, but they were peripheral to it rather than directly involved in it. So I've had to chase a number of different people was one of the issues, and then between one thing and another, it's there's
sure. But Neil, the bottom line is you're getting the same response as me, and I accept that you're an honest person. But basically, I got a commitment that question would be answered about 2.5 years ago. I sent reminders, and everything went cold on that.
Matter of interest?
Donald Byrne from RTE from Morning Ireland.
Right.
Who I think probably should know, given that they have a lot of the inserts. But look, Neil, the bottom line on this is that, the RTE sponsorship guidelines say that sponsorship is a relationship whereby somebody gets their name mentioned in return for providing resources for the programme. This is blindingly obviously a sponsored programme. RTE are breaking the law because sponsors are not allowed to have an input into the editorial content of the programme, and that's why you're not getting an answer, isn't it?
That's a massive claim. So if that's actually, it's incorrect also, but if that's the claim, and it's good that you'd be upfront about that now. I'm
absolutely upfront about it, as I was with Donald.
Well, you weren't with me. So if that's the premise.
Well, I referred you to the podcast that he was on.
Right, but even still, I mean, you've got. Who just as a matter of interest, who is the alternative in terms of providing the service that AA Roadwatch provide?
It's not relevant at all. The bottom line.
Why is it not?
Well, first of all, begs the question whether a service is being provided and to whom it's being provided and whether it's necessary for the listeners.
So traffic updates from across the country provided to people in cars and getting into cars and people using our roads isn't a service.
Well, first of all, you get a couple of street names rattled off with adjectives like jammers or chock-a-block after them. It's not clear to me how that's useful to anybody other than the AA. But the bottom line is that that's not averted to in the sponsorship guidelines. Sponsorship guidelines say that sponsorship is any relationship whereby a company gets its product named in return for consideration, and that's what's happening here.
That's what you maintain.
Absolutely,
is
yeah.
Happening here. So.
Are the 8AA not getting their name check?
Of course they are, yeah.
And they are providing resources for that. It clearly meets the definition of sponsorship.
In the same way, you'd have Met Éireann credited for providing weather forecasts.
Met Éireann don't sell insurance. Met Éireann don't run political campaigns.
Yeah, of course. But who provides a service in terms of traffic updates?
It's not relevant.
That I'm aware of.
You could say who provides insurance. You could say a whole bunch of things. It's not relevant for the very simple reason that it's not mentioned in RT's sponsorship guidelines.
So your assumption is that this is a sponsorship. This is an agreed sponsorship arrangement.
I'll read you one paragraph. This is from RTE. Sponsorship is a relationship entered into by a broadcaster or program maker whereby direct or indirect contribution is made to the program in return for promotion of a name, trademark, image, activities or product. The contribution may be given in the form of direct funding, provision of facilities or services, or the supply of goods or prizes. That both of those conditions are clearly met. The AA promotes its website where it runs political campaigns and sells insurance. And the AA funds, at least in part, that service, that broadcast for RTE. The fact that you can argue that.
But the assumption is what? So I understand what sponsorship is. I get that we have sponsorships right across. So the assumption is what? So say, for example, we establish there's a sponsorship arrangement in place. I'm not saying there is. So yeah. say for example, that's the case. So what's the because the sponsorship rules are crystal clear that number one, the sponsor can have no editorial input into the program, which you could hardly deny, and number two, the program cannot cover an area, a political area of campaigning in which the sponsor has an interest. Not correct. So you're saying, so hang on, so say for example, any number of sponsors across any number of areas that editorially, and you can't cover that sort of topic in any sort of, I'm not sure what the point is there. How would you have that much editorial control over a decision to cover a whole range of issues that may impact on a sponsor's area of business?
Well, you have whoever sponsoring the 2FM chart show. A number of years ago, it was Coca-Cola. So they say, this is the Coca-Cola chart show.
Right.
Which is acceptable. Sony Music could not sponsor that. You could not say this is the Sony Music chart show, because that would tend to put pressure on the decision makers to promote Sony Music's product and not that of their competitors. You don't have to show that that's happening. You just have to show that there's a danger that could happen.
Right, but you're suggesting editorially, given that, by the way, there are
this is traffic and travel, and what the AA does day in, day out is promote the notion of motor travel over and above public transport. That's their job. They actually say it on their website.
Yeah, but it's called AA Road. It's Road Watch. So the particular update is on roads.
No, they don't. They call it traffic and travel because they're
RTE Radio 1 Traffic and Travel with the all new.
The latest travel news from the AA in Dublin. It's slow inbound from Burda.
Call it traffic and travel because they're pretending to be not influencing the content.
So is this? So just so I understand sort of the I suppose motive behind the question, is this something that you're concerned about in terms of AA Road Watch and its position as a company and its political campaigns, as you describe them?
Well, I'm reporting on it, but yes, in short. And it is clear that a cosy relationship exists between the AA and RTE. If you search for Conor Faulkner's name on news articles on the AA, he's basically never off the air. People who, like the Road Hauliers Association. In fact, it's not a matter. In fact, Neil, it's not. In fact, it's not a matter of opinion, because I can do that search on Google, and he is mentioned dozens of times more than all other interested parties on that topic combined.
Yeah, and for example, but tell me who are the
For example, I've talked to, the Irish Road Hauliers Association have an odd mention, but very rare. I've talked to people in the Irish Cycling Association. They basically say they can't get on air. Nobody will return their calls.
Well, I'm sure that's not true. No one generally, or no one in RTE?
No one in RTE. They can't get their content onto RTE. They can't get a spokesman on when there's an issue relevant to them.
To me now.
Yes.
Let's be clear. What you're revealing to me now is a whole range of conversations about so something that you've come to me and asked me, what's the specific relationship between AA Road Watch, is actually a much bigger conversation you're asking about. So you're suggesting
absolutely, I'm gathering facts.
Conor Faulkner is on air more than anyone else. Irish Cycling, to quote you, don't get calls returned. Cozy relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can give you Neil, and I can give you examples where, for the issue is cycle lanes, and Conor Faulkner is brought on to give the AA point of view, and the Irish Cycling campaign will point to press releases that are on the same issue that are not picked up.
Yeah, so we've had interaction with the Irish cyclists generally on a number of issues. I could, if the question is around editorial.
Neil.
Hang on for a second.
No. This can be done mathematically just by searching the number of occurrences, and I've done
with
that.
All due respect, that is not mathematical. That is not. So a Google search, and by the way, then talk to me about the bias that's levelled at Google in terms of what that produces in terms of search.
No, it's an RTE search, actually.
Okay, so but there is no way for you to track absolutely every broadcast, every program, every piece of program content, every piece of radio content, every piece of online. But if that's the response that you need from us, well, then you need to put that question. That's not a question you've put to me yet.
That's absolutely true. But the first question is, what is the relationship between RTE and the AA? And 2.5 years later, nobody will answer the question.
Okay, but now that we've had a sort of a more upfront conversation, I can push it.
Excuse me, Neil. I resent that. I had this exact conversation with Donald Byrne of Morning Ireland, in whose programme most of these inserts, or a very high number of these inserts happen. And he basically shrugged his shoulders and said, nothing to do with me, Gov, but I'll find out for you and get in touch with RTE Corporate.
But I think with respect, there's a lot of, I suppose, accusations, for want of a better word, in what you're suggesting now. So I think if there were 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 questions that you need to put to us, rather than it just being a straightforward, what's the relationship between RTE and AA Road Watch?
Surely those subsequent questions depend on the answer to the first one.
No, but you've made a couple there, and it would be wrong
Neil, I think you're pretending that I was in some way secretive about this. This is currently on the website. I asked those questions straight up, and that podcast was available to you when I asked the questions of you.
That's fine, but in any conversation that I've had with you,
that's fair enough. But you nevertheless, is indicative of the fact that neither you nor I can get a straight answer as to how RTE classifies AA Road Watch is indicative of the fact that there is something dodgy going on here.
Well, you see, so again, that's another. You're saying that there's something. There is. You're giving a statement to me now that there's something dodgy going on here, and I'm saying, well, look, that's in your opinion something dodgy. I will actually look into it. I'd be surprised if there's anything dodgy going on. But it isn't an isolated query that you're giving me here. You're also talking to me about AA Road Watch generally, Conor Faulkner specifically, Irish cyclists and others, and a suggestion that there's some sort of editorial bias as a result of what you classify as a cozy arrangement.
I can't attribute motives, but I can observe the facts. And the facts are that when you search the RTE website for quotations of Conor Faughnan on matters of road transport, there are many hundreds. They're counted in the hundreds. When you do the same search and do Irish Cycling Association, you get responses in the dozens. I think actually it was 12 hits.
But that's like
there were in
oranges.
total.
That's like comparing the Irish Cycling Association versus AA Roadwatch.
Yeah, but why is that?
But that's like saying, FAI versus IRFU, or any number of comparisons, or Coca-Cola versus Pepsi, or...
So in the specific instance where Conor Faughnan is brought on to discuss the issue of cycle lanes, and the Irish Cycling Association, who have issued a press release to the programme that he's on, don't get the call and don't get a call back.
Well, you're saying they don't get a call, that there's no conversation going on, or that
yes.
What about Road Safety Authority or any number of others that are frequently on the airways to talk about any number of
the Road Safety Authority is a government organisation. The AA is a campaigning organisation that campaigns in favour of the motor industry and generally against public transport and cycling. And it's also a commercial organisation that's selling insurance. And they have their website. They have listeners referred to their website about 100 times a week on RTE.
Right. So
nobody could dispute that constitutes sponsorship when the AA are paying to get their website referred to 100 times a week on RTE.
Yeah. So the specific nature of the arrangement, I'll actually now, but in the context of what you've also raised there, because there's a bigger issue, and I'd also like to give my editorial colleagues a chance to sort of give their sort of insights into editorial across those topics.
Yeah, look, Neil, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't think that there's somebody cackling and twirling their moustache in RTE. What I think is that the AA is run by very, very smart PR people. Also, you asked about the service. I'm not entirely sure why people who all have their qualifications in PR and none of them have their qualifications in transport economics or anything related to that. I'm not sure how that constitutes a service, but that's a different issue. But I think that they're very smart PR people who've put RTE in a situation of some dependency, and nobody in RTE is cackling and twirling their moustache and saying we're going to do evil things now. What they are normal people who are responding to normal pressures. And if you had the news sponsored by Fianna Fáil, even if you never had any communication or notes from Fianna Fáil on how to present the news, if those journalists knew that their salary was coming from Mount Street, then that would tend to impact their coverage, and that's why that's not allowed.
Well, of course, news and current affairs can't be sponsored anyway.
That's true, but the news sponsorship also includes the provision of services such as a free studio in the city centre.
A free studio in the city centre?
Yes.
Right. So you're maintaining then that the free studio in the city centre is what? What's the arrangement you're suggesting there?
The AA pays the rent on a building that where RTE uses a studio to interview people from the city centre.
Okay. So
and they boasted about it, and they boasted about it for years until people made the point that this was totally illegal. Now they still do it, but they just don't tell anybody.
They being AA or they being RTE?
RTE News regularly had a line joining us now from the AA studio to discuss XYZ policy is this person. They now say joining us now a little bit coy. They say from a city centre studio.
Right, I'll have to look into that. So do you want me? So two questions. One is just so I'm not incomplete in what I come back to you with.
Sure.
Do you want to put those? There's 5 or 6 questions you have there.
I will happily put them in email, but
after I come back to you on the arrangement.
I have been 100% happy to be upfront about this. I am entirely confident that people in RTE are fully aware. If you are not, I'm sure there are some people fully aware of why the question is being asked, and I'm fully sure that's why you're not getting an answer in the same way as I haven't got an answer for 2.5 years.
Well, look, I will put that. I've got a meeting with some comms colleagues shortly, where I'll put that on the agenda. And I'll try and nail this for you in one way or the other, because I'd like to nail it anyway.
And I would raise the point that I have been waiting for really quite a long time to speak to someone. RTE receives hundreds of millions of euro of both licensed PR funds and from selling advertising on the public airwaves. They have a responsibility to explain how they serve the public, and just refusal to answer for month after month and year after year is not good enough.
Yeah, no, and I would accept that. From your perspective, what I'd be saying to you is that there are numerous queries of all sorts that come across, and it's not that I haven't tried to answer at this end. I would just say that a million other things have.
I accept that there's a queue there. I don't accept that queue is 2.5 years long.
No, I would agree on that. So look, I haven't been talking to you for 2.5 years. I will get to the top of this or the bottom of it either way in the next day or so. But look, if I find anything today, I'll be back to you. I will commit to be back to you in the next day or two.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Yeah. And look, if I hear anything in the meantime, if I can go back to you before then, I will.
Okay, thanks for that.
Appreciate it.
Okay, have a good day. Bye-bye. So that was recorded on the 26th of November. I sent Neil an email after the phone call to make sure that he had the questions clear, precisely what does RTE classify AA Roadwatch as, and if they claimed it wasn't a sponsored programme, then how could they explain that, and how could they justify use of free AA studios for news interviews. I also told Neil that I believe RTE, as a publicly funded body, has a duty to explain itself to the public, and that if RTE failed to answer, I'd still report on the issue and use that recording you just heard to highlight that failing. 2 days later, Neil emailed me with some PR guff that didn't address my questions at all, other than to say RTE News does not currently use studios funded by the AA. I replied saying that he had committed to answer my questions, not just give PR blather about how great and independent RTE is, and to say that the statement that RTE News does not currently use AA studios is ambiguous. Did that mean that they weren't using the studio on that day or at that exact time, or did it mean that they had a general policy of not using AA studios anymore? There followed a long series of emails back and forth with Neil dodging and affecting not to understand questions. At different points he asked me what did I mean by AA Roadwatch, is that the traffic news segment? He suggested that I should ask the AA about RTE policy rather than ask AA, and he suggested I should contact RTE's Freedom of Information officer. I did eventually drag out of Neil an admission that RTE has no particular policy of not using AA studios for interviewing news guests. They just happened not to be using it at the particular time he wrote his answer. He wouldn't say when they'd last used it, and I asked whether they pay the going rate for renting a studio or accepted its use for free in breach of its own rule book. Neil didn't answer. I asked multiple times whether RTE accepted the fairly obvious conclusion that the AA supplying traffic updates in return for promoting its name meets their own definition of sponsorship, and I got an answer of sorts. Quote, AA Roadwatch does not sponsor these programs. Rather, RTE has a commercial agreement with AA Roadwatch to provide a service, which did sound like an answer, but was it? There exists a thing called a non-denial denial. That's when someone is asked about something and they give an answer that sounds like a denial, but on close reading actually isn't. The most famous example comes from Bill Clinton when he was asked whether he had an affair with Monica Lewinsky. He said this:
I did not have sexual relations with that woman. These allegations are false. And I need to
now that sounds very much like he's denying having had an affair, but the deception turns on what exactly is meant by sexual relations. In the US South, that means intercourse, which wasn't exactly what they did. So although he deliberately gave a totally false impression, he was clever enough to do so without actually telling a lie. So when I looked at Neil O'Gorman saying that RTE in fact had a commercial arrangement with the AA, I thought, hang on, a sponsorship deal is a commercial arrangement. So if he's saying that they have a commercial arrangement, that's not a denial that the arrangement amounts to sponsorship within RTE rules. I made this point to Neil. I even emailed him the link to the Wikipedia page describing a non-denial denial, but he refused to address the point. Neil left me with a very bland statement saying, RTE is satisfied that the agreement between RTE and AA Roadwatch for the provision of services, i.e. traffic and travel updates, is fully compliant with Broadcasting Authority regulations. In a moment, I talk about this to an expert on journalistic ethics.
Make your view heard. Record your own contribution and email it to podcast@here'show.ie. You can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
On the line now, I have Dr. Michael Foley. He is the Professor Emeritus at the School of Media at TU Dublin, that's formerly DIT. He's also a member of the National Union of Journalists Ethics Council, and he's been invited by the International Federation of Journalists and UNESCO to write a syllabus on journalism, safety and ethics. Michael, you've been listening to the podcast so far. In general, what's your reaction?
Well, I have to say, it hadn't occurred to me until I heard the podcast, the position of AA Roadwatch. Having listened, though, it's both intriguing and worrying. RTE as a public service broadcaster has to be, especially today, to the letter, it has to abide to the letter of the law or to regulations, whatever. It must make sure that it is a trusted source of news and current affairs, because obviously with all the questioning of news and current affairs, the issues around fake news, whatever, we've got to have those news outlets that people can turn to and say, yes, I can trust that. And if there's any question whatsoever, that question has to be answered. And I think you've raised some interesting issues around AA Roadwatch. The number of things that sort of, when I was, raised a flag for me was one, well, it was obviously the relationship between AA Roadwatch and RT, which you've obviously still got to have defined for you.
Yes.
The other one was the use of Conor Falkland quite so often. As you rightly say, he is with a lobbying organisation, an organisation that has a function defending, as it would see, the motorist interests or whatever. So I think you raise very interesting issues, and I think they could possibly be applied wider as well. There are people. One thing,
Michael, I recall is Colm Tobin, the novelist, writing about when he was the editor of McGill magazine. He was surprised. This is going back to the 1980s, I think. He was surprised to learn that Aer Lingus at that time would give free tickets to journalists just on request. As somebody who's a specialist in teaching young journalists and in journalistic ethics, why would a company give free stuff to a journalist, and why should or should not a journalist accept it?
Well, I do recall once going to America where Aer Lingus paid, and the Irish Times agreed, which I regret since, where we were asked did we want to go to some major sporting event, which I declined to go. I couldn't see what purpose that had or why I would be given a free ticket. But obviously the reason was for what they would presumably call goodwill. But a lot of companies do this. There used to be far more of it in terms of, free trips and that sort of stuff. That has probably died slightly because I suppose there's no real...
What's the reason that that's controversial?
Well, I think it's controversial because I don't think any news organisation should take anything for free.
Why? Get me the reason why that's the case.
Because it undermines your independence, and even if independence isn't undermined, there is a perception out there with the public that if the public know that the travel pages of a newspaper are written entirely following free trips, well then why would they believe anything there? Now, when I was in the Irish Times, they actually brought in an ethics document which actually said what you could and could not take for free, which in the main was very little. You could obviously take if somebody gave you a biro with a company logo on it or something like that, there was nothing wrong with that. But anything, more substantial or anything that would be there clearly to get you to be favourably disposed towards the company should not be accepted. And that's what the Irish Times did when I was there.
The one other question I want to ask you about is the actual content of AA. Now, I've spoken to RTE spokesperson, but I've also had off-the-record sources in RTE, and they very much had an attitude of shrugging their shoulders about the traffic news and say, well, this is just like the weather. It's uncontested information, seems to be what they're saying. But in fact, the fact that it exists draws attention to perhaps the problem of, traffic jams over and above people using other transport facilities, public transport in particular. What did you think in particular about how many TDs have used AA Roadwatch in the Dáil to say, spend more money on roads in my constituency.
Well, I think the AA Roadwatch has, and I admit that I hadn't thought about it till I heard your piece. I think it is has become an incredible brand because of the AA, because of AA Roadwatch. And I take your point that having AA Roadwatch on the news bulletins, whatever, has raised the profile of the AA itself. There was always this thing about the voices of the mainly the young women who were the reporters. You know, the idea of the sort of the South Dublin Lewis accent, whatever, was, you know, all that all became sort of very identifiable as a piece of goodwill for the company. And yes, I mean, like you, I have no idea what the commercial relationship is.
Well, I actually do have an idea from off the record, as I understand it, from sources within RTE. RTE have provided some technical assistance in terms of connectivity for those studios, but the rent on the building and the salary of the presenters is paid entirely by the AA.
That's what I assumed. The issue with the AA, is interesting because the image we have of the AA is formed by AA Roadwatch. There's absolutely no doubt that the notion of the AA being a trustworthy brand comes about because they appear on RTE and especially on the news programs.
Do you think that brand leaks over so that when somebody says, and now here's Conor Faulkner of the AA, that he is more believable than another lobbyist lobbying for a different industry would be because he has that association?
I think so. I think so. And I think also it presumably, and this is the reason they do it, presumably it leaks over into, you know, purchasing car insurance. Mm-hmm. You're buying from a very reputable source whose identification with, say, RTE means that it's sort of it becomes quasi-official nearly, because maybe in people's minds they don't see them quite the same way as they view AXA. Mm-hmm. That the AA is this thing called AA Roadwatch that appears every morning, you know, while they're driving to work, that somebody comes on the air. It's just simply somebody who sounds like a journalist, although doesn't work for RTE, as we know, but sounds like a journalist. And so there is an authority, I suppose, that goes with the AA Roadwatch, which it gets from its association with RTE, which is the purpose of sponsoring a program. And the AA gets their authority from RTE's news to to what it does, which is to presumably sells car insurance and presumably other products as well.
One thing that RTE guidelines say very clearly is that sponsors are not permitted to have any editorial input whatsoever into the programs that they sponsor, and they're not even allowed to sponsor a program at all if the content of that program could touch on their area of operations. Now, the AA, not only they have editorial input, they have complete editorial control, and RTE get around this, and it seems to me that they're trying to say that they can decide by fiat what is and is not sponsorship. There are two tests in the RTE rules. One, there's a name check, and two, there's some sort of payment in cash or kind for that. AA Roadwatch clearly ticks both those boxes. What do you think of RTE just saying it's not sponsorship because we say it's not?
They have to abide by the rules that are there, which are an interpretation of the Broadcasting Act. What I'm a bit surprised at, in a sense, since listening to your work, is that the Broadcasting Authority haven't had a word with them about it. Mm-hmm. Now, I suppose what RTE would say, I mean, to offer some defence for them, is that, in a sense, now forgetting the actual rules which you're quoting, but to say that AA Roadwatch, in a way, is a cocoon, that there's no RTE journalist has anything to do with it. They're not in the studios. They come from somewhere else. They only talk about what they would see as their area of expertise, and we can argue about that, but I mean, we can just put it for a second, which is conditions on the road, and that they never, ever say anything that might be newsworthy in terms of news and current affairs. And they never tell you why.
Dr. Michael Foley, Professor Emeritus at the School of Media at TU Dublin, also a member of the NUJ's Ethics Council. Thank you very much for talking to me.
If you like the Here's How podcast, please rate and review the show on iTunes and other podcast providers.
As I mentioned, this type of podcast takes much more work than normal, and even the normal ones are quite a big time commitment. If you'd like to hear more podcasts from me and more investigations into the institutions of Irish life, I'd certainly love to do them, and I could devote more time to them if I got them sponsored. I have a page on Patreon that allows ordinary listeners to sponsor each podcast for $1 or $2, whatever you want. So if you think that it's valuable, please do that and share the podcast to your friends so they can do the same. Go to the website for sources and references for the show. And while you're there, you can also like the show on Facebook. You can follow @Here's How Podcast on Twitter and get in touch with me if you can suggest a guest or a topic for a future show. Also, you can find out how to subscribe to the podcast for free on your computer, on your phone, or by email. All that, including my Patreon link, are at www.here'show.ie. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. Thank you for listening.